You're listening to Pitchside Pioneers, and I'm your host, Julia Anderson.
There is a woman who is one of the pioneers. Like, it's not just men who've been contributing to this field.
Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Pitchside Pioneers. In this podcast, I share the stories of women who are pioneers in football, whether that be in the media, in analytics, or on the pitch. Today's episode features analyst and founder of Source Football, Sarah Rudd. While now she is best known for her method to evaluate player performances and her work at Arsenal Football Club, Rudd actually started her career as a software developer for Microsoft. A love for the sport and a discussion with Seattle Sounders owner Adrian Hanover about Moneyball led her away from the world of tech and into the world of football.
He was kind of the first person that said, have you read Moneyball? Do you think we can do this in soccer? And I was like, yeah, I've read Moneyball. I have no idea if we can do this. But that's what kind of put the seed in my head. So I started going to sports analytics conferences, and, the speakers there would say, like, just do something to show teams what you can do, because everybody thinks that they can do this, but you need to have something tangible. So then there was a research competition by a company called StatDNA, where they would give you data and then you write a research paper on it. And so I wrote one that's kind of like the early past value models in the industry. So I won that competition, and that's kind of how they found out about me, and then they offered me a job on the back of it.
You may recognize the name StatDNA, as within a year of Sarah being hired, the company went from being a partner to being acquired by Arsenal Football Club in late 2012.
It was certainly harder on the outside, because it's like, oh, it's just these external consultants. We don't really have to listen to them or something like that. But once we came inside, it was like a little bit easier. And I think the fact that the club leadership, Ivan Gazidis, said, we're going to make a pretty large financial investment to bring these people in, that kind of gave a little bit of weight to our existence. There were discussions over what exactly constitutes a shot. Do headers count as shots or not? And so nowadays, the conversations are much more different. But in the early days, it was really can we even get agreement on what do we mean when we're talking about counting the number of shots?
Here was an American-based company, including an American woman at that, coming into a storied English football club during a time when many were skeptical of data's usage in the game. One thing that helped build trust was using video whenever discussing findings with the decision makers at the club. This allowed coaches to more easily see what the StatDNA team found with their own eyes.
Being a woman, I didn't notice too much. I think what really helped me there was that I was seen as an expert in the area, and there were male counterparts necessarily to always go to and be like, oh, well, I'll go to him instead of her. So that was fortunate. But being American definitely was hard. And so, yeah, you have to kind of earn a little bit of credibility being an American, and saying things like match instead of game, the little things like that.
The growing pains of the acquisition understandably took time, especially as roles and processes were not always clear.
Early on, Arsene Wenger was the key decision maker. And so there wasn't really a good process in place of how to make decisions. It was just what he wanted to do. And so there wasn't really a lot of feedback either in terms of what does he like, what does he doesn't like. He just kind of took in all the information and then made a decision. And then we moved on to the next decision. And so that, I think, was really challenging, where, you want to get better, you want to improve, but it's just kind of this black box process. And then I think not a lot of people realize this, but the size of the staff grew enormously during my time there. And so, with it comes a lot of advantages, where there's more people to do more work. And so you can really dive in deeper, but then you also have a lot of people with different ideas coming in. I think in a lot of ways that worked in our favor, in that the people coming in tended to be more receptive to using data, but it also just meant that there were more voices to be heard. And so without a process, it can be quite difficult to navigate.
The world of football analytics is often shrouded in secrecy, which can present some challenges for analysts.
It's a hard line to walk, because you're literally competing with every club in the world. And so you don't want to give too much away. But I think, the downside, and particularly I see this now that I'm out of Arsenal and kind of more back into the community, is that without good guidance, people go down kind of really bad routes. And then what happens is, they're maybe making some bad assumptions or not really following best practices. And then they do this at a club. And then, the work that they produce doesn't really match what people are seeing or what they think. And then they say, oh, this stuff never works. This stuff never works. And so the whole industry kind of is like suffering because there's a lot of really good work out there, but there's also some not so good work out there. And without some guidance on like what's what, people just kind of are easy to dismiss the whole industry based on, a couple bad experiences.
I likely don't have to remind listeners that Arsenal have not won the league in 20 years. The fact that this hasn't changed since the StatDNA acquisition has given some skeptics further doubt. Arsenal's analytics department emphasized using the best models and technology around, but recognized that the decision-making process was outside their scope of influence. Sarah is also an Arsenal fan, which meant additional pressure to make a positive impact.
And there's certainly like a number of factors of, why Arsenal hasn't won a league. Certainly there's things that we could have handled better as a department, but I think overall, pretty happy with the success. But I think, there are definitely a few signings where people were like, oh, that's a StatDNA signing or something like that. And I don't think there was ever a player that was a StatDNA signing. Like it was always part of the recruitment process, but not like a sole decision. And yeah, there's a lot that goes on at a club that like fans don't necessarily have insight into that complicate things. I think the academy is probably one area that, not to take credit for it, but I think we had a huge value add there where it's taking top class professionals and then giving them tools to help them do their jobs better. And that paid massive, massive dividends. But people won't necessarily view that as like an analytics win. But I think inside the club, we'd probably say, yeah, that really helped things quite a bit.
Sarah left Arsenal in summer 2021, had a brief spell with another organization before starting her own consultancy firm, Source Football. When she left, it had been just under a decade since Arsenal made that cutting-edge move to bring data into the club. In that time, Sarah had grown as an analyst and built an elite industry knowledge. She's taken everything she's learned in her football analytics journey so far and is now using it to help improve decision-making at more football clubs with Source Football.
Early on, and I think everybody goes through this phase, but it's like, well, it's just a math problem that you have to solve. And so even back in like, 2007 or 2008, when I started thinking about these things, it's like, oh, just, throw it all into a neural network and like, we'll find the answer. And it sounds ridiculous now, but like, I don't think that's a good approach. And so I've become much more of like, let's just really measure everything that's happening on the field as well as we can. But like, everything has to be tied to a football concept, not a mathematical concept. And then we can throw it into the models, but like without a really, really high quality base of like, we're measuring everything on the pitch exactly how like a human being would see it. Like, I don't think it'll work. So that's one thing that's changed. And I think I've become like almost militant about that. And then the other one is the whole modern scouting process is completely broken. It has the, I guess, threat of being detrimental if not managed correctly. And so I think the next things we want to get into is just completely overhauling how people do subjective scouting. Sitting down and watching a match for 90 minutes without real focus on what you're looking at is inefficient and wrong. Like you're going to be subjected to so many of the mental biases that we all know about. But I think I'm just really excited about the group of talent that we've been able to bring together and to solve these problems. And there have been some advances in terms of like the types of data that we have access to now that just enables us to answer the really hard questions in a way that we haven't been able to.
Since her paper on a pass value model, Sarah has truly become one of the pioneers of football analytics. However, this is a title she's never been completely comfortable with.
It's always hard because I'm a big believer in taking ideas from other places and just applying them in a different context. So, that pass value model was based on another paper from the NFL. And so, it never feels like, oh, I did anything that revolutionary, but at the same time, 10 years later, there's still people struggling with coming up with those types of models. So yeah, it makes me feel a little old, but I guess also proud that there is a woman who is one of the pioneers. Like, it's not just men who've been contributing to this field.
Before we wrap up today's episode, Sarah had some advice for aspiring female sports analysts.
Just apply and put yourself out there. So when I'm hiring, the number of applications from women is like single digits. It's really, really small, but then those applications tend to be really high quality. And I think a lot of women are hesitant to apply to jobs thinking that they're not qualified. Don't reject yourself from a job, let other people do that. And there's really no downside to applying to these jobs that you're not sure about. That's my big advice, is just put yourself out there, and then also find your network of women to just support each other and talk about issues, because I think I've been pretty fortunate that my time at Arsenal was like pretty positive and pretty encouraging, but that's not always the case. Unfortunately, sports attracts really, really difficult personalities, to put it nicely. And yeah, I know a lot of women who've been put in difficult situations. And so having that network to talk about, I think is really important.
I hope you enjoyed learning about Sarah Rudd. How incredible is it that one of the pioneers of modern football analytics is still so driven and excited about improving how we evaluate the beautiful game? Thanks again for listening, and keep an eye out for the third episode of Pitchside Pioneers, which features the UK's first female Muslim referee, Jawahir Roble. Be sure to subscribe to Pitchside Pioneers on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can also find the episodes and more on my YouTube page, Julia_Anderson, and Twitter @JuliaAnderson18. Thanks, and see you next time.